Welcome to the Happy Wealthy Show. I'm your host, Neil Flora. And today in studio, virtually, we have Jimmy Nelson. Now, Jimmy is somebody that the first time I saw him, I'm like, damn, this dude could cut me with how sharp he was. I mean, we're talking about collar, I'm talking about the suit. Like, my dad grew up teaching in a university, but Indians are known for their dress, right? We want to dress a certain way. And he had about 40 suits. So going in, shopping for suits, looking at the colorfuls, looking at the inside of the jacket, these are things that I was come to know as a child. And so when I saw Jimmy, I'm like, this guy's got game. But it was more than that. I started seeing him and I'm like, anytime there was an important event where other people that all names that we know, the big names, somehow Jimmy's there emceeing. He's bringing people into a room. So he is the consummate host down to all the things he says on stage. So he is a speaker, but he's also a coach. And today we're going to learn about like how do we tell a better story and make impact with our brands, have a better voice. And he's going to school us on that today. I'm excited to dive into this conversation. My brother, Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, man. I've been looking forward to this all day, and I appreciate the compliments. You're talking about your father. For me, it was my gramps. If you look here, I'll try to. I have my Sinatra kind of throwback. My favorite TV show is Mad Men, right? So that era of that 1955, 1965, when everybody, it was that attention to detail. I grew up with him, right? And somewhere I've always said that I was an old soul somewhere along the way. So I appreciate other people that also appreciate that kind of attention to detail things as well.
You know, it's so funny that you said Sinatra because I almost was going to break that as a description of you, right? And so, yeah,
Total compliment. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just that, Mad Men, anything from that era, old Hollywood. There was just something about that time when attention to detail meant something, and I know, and I always tell people, we had this conversation a little bit beforehand. I don't do that to make other people, it's for me, right?
yes,
And specifically, as I look at my story as somebody that was a former 100-pound overweight, 3-time college dropout, I understand all of my friends in the entrepreneurial world that are like, I'm never wearing a suit again if I don't have to. And I'm like, I get it. I didn't come from that world. And so for me to be here and then to have that opportunity to dress the way that I always really respected my gramps and people from that era, it was the flip flop. But I totally get those people that are like, I had to do this growing up and then I went into business for myself and I'm never doing that again. I respect that as well.
yeah. This is a cool synergy that we haven't previously discussed. But yeah, I think I said that. Like my dad had a whole side of a room with suits. He had every pair of shoes. They went into a plastic baggie. I buffed them when he got home, right? So they didn't have dust on them. He wore a turban, but he had like 30 of them, and they were like stylish and they were pre-made. Like he dressed the part. And so I learned that part of me. And I did also go into corporate. I used to
Yeah.
wear the cufflinks every day. And funny story, when my wife first met me, and we were just kind of flirting and stuff, she goes, "You don't seem like you'd be very handy." Little did she know that I'm raised by an immigrant farmer, right? And we did fucking everything. Like we repaired everything. We did like my dad would not spend money on anything, right?
You
He
had
was
both sides.
yes, yeah.
See,
So
I'm
he
not handy. See, she would have been right about me. I'm not handy. I know my strengths in life, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. Being like my poor dad, I always tell him, I was like, I don't, both my dad and my stepdad, both are really good around like fixing things and no cars and all this stuff. And I'm just like, look, I have learned to stay in my lane. And unfortunately, I did not get the handyman itch in my world.
I came to being a handy person through some personal duress, but that's a show for another time. But I really want to, this show is really about being wealthy and happy, but ultimately, I want to uncover that dirty middle, right? What did it take to actually get there? And you already started us out by talking about being a multiple dropout and being overweight. But let's rewind it maybe a little bit further back and tell us a little bit about like, okay, so do you have parents that started out in this world? Like, what were their early influences, and how do you think it brought you to a place where you were looking at your life, going, "Man, what the hell am I doing?"
Yeah. Anytime somebody asks me kind of where did this start and how did you get where you got it all, I go back to first grade and I realized that in the first grade, I was exposed to what has been the biggest addiction of my life, which seems odd for a first grader, but really, I grew up in West Texas, in Lubbock, Texas, and this was kind of early '80s. If I kind of age myself here, But in first grade, I was in Murphy Elementary School. And that was before there was kind of a childhood obesity epidemic. And I was the fat kid in my class. And at the time, I was kind of the only kid I knew whose parents were divorced. I don't know if that was factual, but it was just one of those things I was kind of self conscious about and kind of being pulled between two households to the point of like, oh, which last name do I go with? I don't want to upset anybody. And so it was always this place of not really feeling like I could totally be me, right? It was like, who do I need to appease today? However, in the first grade, that Christmas, the entire elementary school were doing like a Christmas presentation. In my first grade class, we got picked to do a Christmas musical number called Too Fat for the Chimney. And I thought, so the story was basically Santa wasn't going to be able to deliver presents because he had gotten too fat for the chimney. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is maybe my opportunity. I'm the fat kid in class. This, the numbers about him. And they ended up picking my best friend, Justin Martin, who was the skinniest kid in class, but he was a popular kid. They let him be Santa. Right? Politics. Always politics when it comes to this stuff. So they wrapped a bunch of pillows around him, put him in a Santa outfit, and then all of my other friends dressed up like 1980s Jane Fonda, like jazzercise, like with the leg warmers and the headbands.
Yeah.
And they all went, so upstage is basically the furthest away from the audience you could get. And they literally went through like a jazzercise, like a step aerobics routine. Yours truly, fat little insecure Jimmy, my granny had made me a feetsy onesie pajama thing with like the drop bottom and the stocking cap, and pushed me and my little fat ass to the end of the stage in front of all the other students, all the other teachers, faculty, and had me sing the song "Too Fat for the Chimney." And I was terrified. I didn't want to be there. I thought, oh, that looks way safer because there's people up there. My buddies, Justin playing Santa didn't have to say anything. And here I am at this edge of this stage. But here's where this is where the magic happened, man. I take a deep breath. I start singing this song. And he's too fat for the chimney, too fat for the chimney. And all of a sudden, I see people in the audience smiling and nodding. And it was the first time in my life I got two things happened. I got a positive emotional response from an audience. And I really feel, that was the first time I just got to be 100% me on that stage, not some version to appease one side of a family or a teacher or somebody else. And when I look back on what now has become a 17-year career of helping business owners, increase their income and their impact by learning to tell a story, by learning to get an emotional response from an audience, it started there. But that's not, I'd love to go back and say, hey, that was the moment, from then on out, it was a trajectory up. I have also found that oftentimes in our lives, when we realize what we were gifted for and what we were made for, there's also this like list that immediately pops up that tells you, oh, this is why you could never do this. This is why there's somebody better than you here or could sing better. And I dealt with that a lot growing up. And you were talking about that messy middle. It just kind of sent me on a path of, I would say, like a victim mentality thing of always talking why it's harder for me. This is why these people are successful and I can't do this. I can't get into the right schooling. It's not my fault that I'm fat. Lard's its own food group in West Texas. Nothing was ever, it wasn't ever my fault, but I never looked at it as an excuse. I was just explaining. I don't know if you've ever run into people that are like, oh, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, that's all it was me deflecting. And that was a lot of my upbringing, junior high, trying even to get into college and knowing we didn't have the money to send me to the schools I wanted to go to train. And that's where I found myself at 22, a 3-time college dropout, 100 pounds overweight, and I moved back in with my parents.
Wow. Well, this is gonna be a great episode because we're already getting into a lot of the thick of the things. But let's rewind a little bit of what Jimmy's saying here and dissect this a little bit.
Sure.
So one of the things is that, and this happens so much in business and life, is that we feel like one opportunity escaping, not understanding that life, God, source, universe is funneling us into something where we can meet resistance, chaos, and uncomfortableness to elevate us, right? And that's what I see that happened in your moment. Number two, which was amazing, is that so much of the meaning that we put to things is we add the meaning, right? To that point,
Absolutely.
to that day, you were like, wait, I don't get attention. And now it's like you have this idea. You were given the idea that there's a way for Jimmy to get attention. Now, it may have taken you time, and that's the part of entrepreneurship that people don't understand is that it's an additive effect. There's no quick hyperbolic region in all of this. But I think the other thing that's so amazing about the beginning of the story is like is that you got a moment to really understand what it means to be authentic, right? To show up, to fully show up, and like, and that's what we really are thirsting for. Is like, can I find a place to express myself where I can be witnessed in my authenticity in that way and be witnessed doing it?
Yeah.
And I think for most of us, that's really where we feel like our impact lies is in whatever venue, whatever thing that we choose. It doesn't have to be on stage, but when we find a place that we are living authentically and other people can witness that and receive the gifts of that, then we're fucking on fire.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it was that idea of you talk about being authentic, and I think it was always chasing back to that. If I could only, and this is the story I told myself in my head, if I could only get the right training, if I could only get the right opportunity, if I could just focus on my gift and not have and this is, you talk about that victim mentality. So I wore this weird badge of honor where I had told myself a story. Everything is 3 times harder for me than it is for anybody else. So I'll give you an example. Trying to go to school, be a theater major, trying to get better at what I felt was my gifting, but having to hold down 2 jobs and commuting from my parents' house to school, which was an hour and a half away. Or once I did finally go off to college in that second or third year on that the multiple attempts, trying to hold down jobs where, for those that don't know, being a theater major, it's almost its own job because you have classes, but whatever production is going on, if you didn't get cast, then they expect you to help build the sets or run tech or something. So it's almost like having another job. And all my friends that were, they had a scholarship or mom and dad were paying for things. Anytime I wasn't living up to my potential, I had this scapegoat out of like, well, of course I'm not, because they have something easier than me.
Mhm.
And that for the longest time until I identified it, I thought I was justifying things. You know what's crazy? I remember somebody asking me one time early on in college, kind of what my goals were. This is how much people say people don't change. I was a different animal back then. I remember telling somebody that I don't set a lot of goals because I don't want to let myself down or be disappointed. So I thought it was safer to go through life not chasing things or not setting specific goals, but because I thought that was the more responsible way to live life. And I was like, wow, that was a different human being ago. It really was.
Wow, that's a tremendous lot amount of change. And it's interesting. I was just even working on working with a client on this today before we got on this. It's like we have so many opportunities in our life to exile ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a real phenomenon when there's this thing called parts work, it's internal family systems, and there are parts of us that we put in the basement. We put in the other parts of our personalities and stuff, they don't want anybody to know that it's there. And we physically exile ourselves, and we are waiting for somebody to anoint us to give us permission when that permission is only ours to take and only ours to give. And it's like, how do we move forward with that? People listening to this and like, all of this is so applicable in your business life and where you're going. And it's like, what do you mean that I'm not giving myself permission? Well, it's that unconscious tether. It's the elephant that was once a baby that was chained by a rope and now is an adult that has no freedom to move forward.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you brought up permission. And so, as I continue to share that story with people and I remember the moment I was trying to go to school for the third time in Florida in a theater department again. And I remember my mom calling. So I was about 22. And she just said, "Hey, we're worried about you. All these collection agencies, I'd maxed out multiple credit cards. And we're like, we feel like you need to come home. We're worried about you." And inside of me, I wanted to bow up and I wanted that movie moment of, no, I'm going to chase my dream and I'm going to make this work. And I really just surrendered. I knew she was right. And it was the hardest thing. It was so humiliating having to move back home at 22 and live upstairs at my parents' house. But this is where the permission part comes in. So I'm at home. Back here in Dallas, and I'd stopped pursuing any kind of performance. I was bartending and waiting tables. And there was a guy that I was working with, and I watched him losing weight, right? And I always joke when I talk to audiences, I said, I envy, specifically in this like influence era that we live in, I said, I envy ladies do this so much better than we as guys do is if they see something that's working for somebody else, I feel like they share all the time. Hey, what are you doing? You look fantastic. What are you wearing? What are those heels? What are the makeup? But we, in our weird egotistical way, I didn't want to ask him. He had something, he was doing something that I wanted. He was getting a result that I wanted.
Mhm.
And it took me months to ask him what he was doing. And then when he even told me what he was doing, because it didn't fit in the box in my head that I thought was acceptable, I even said no. And it wasn't until months later when he kind of showed me how he was getting in shape at home, and I swallowed the ego because I had this moment, and I keep this on my desk right here. It's this thing that says, "Are you willing to be willing?" And I had this moment when I was getting ready, and I got out of the shower one day. I was gonna go wait tables, and I'd wrap the towel around me, and that's not a spot. Being that heavy in a towel, you don't spend a lot of time in front of the mirror. But I remember just taking a moment and looking and not respecting the guy that was looking back at me. And it was just kind of this, what are you going to, it was the first time I took 100% responsibility for where I was in my life. And this idea of, are you willing to be willing? I keep here because up until that point, anytime somebody had suggested something, it wasn't that people hadn't tried to help me before. Anytime somebody had suggested something that was outside of my default, I looked at it as an attack and a judgment because I wasn't willing to be willing to think a little differently, do something a little differently. And it wasn't until that moment is where that shifted. And it was crazy. Is what I found is the minute you're just open to something that isn't your default, the universe has a really crazy way of showing you all these things around you that have been there as tools and resources the whole time you just weren't open to, and you were looking for permission or something else. And it was crazy. Like this whole opportunity opened. I started being able to drop the weight. I started performing here again in Dallas. And here's where the permission part comes from that. I start losing weight. I kind of get my mojo back. I get back on stage, and somebody here in Dallas saw me in a show and said, Jimmy, why aren't you in New York City? And I was like, I don't know. And I was waiting for somebody else to come say, you should go chase your actual dream and go to New York. And I was waiting for that permission you just talked about. And it wasn't until I went there, it wasn't until somebody else suggesting it to me that I gave myself permission to go chase my dream.
Wow, I mean, Jimmy, this wasn't supposed to be a 2-hour podcast, dude. We got so much to talk about and what you're sharing. This is so good, and I hope people that are listening are really learning from Jimmy right now because there are valuable lessons and on all these things. Not the least of which is like when you're in a place where you're like, wow, you have help in sight, but you don't ask for help. And when I teach this help concept, I call it. It's an acronym for me. I call it HEART, empathy, leadership, and presence. And these are the four parts how you both give and receive help. I'm teaching this in my mastermind right now. And so first what I hear is our inability to ask for help. Our second thing and this is universally one of my top 5 things, is our inability to receive. Right? Our hands are full of the past and we have an inability to receive. But I just want to, for you and everybody who's listening right now, give you a sense of forgiveness around this because a lot of this isn't you. It really is a function of how we are made up biologically. Because when you understand something a certain way, it's like when you tell somebody, hey, they don't have to struggle in some certain area of their life. The truth of the matter is that it's more important to keep understanding the world as we see it and not change that narrative, even if it works out to our better. And I say to clients, it's like, if I give you an idea that's outside of how you understand the world, you're going to fall into convenient amnesia. You'll go, it's like the thing where like, hey, we can all change. And you sit in a group and everybody goes, yes. And when they go off on their own, they don't do the work because they haven't embodied it. It's not yours. You haven't gone through the mental, emotional hurdles to embody. That's what that word really means. EMBODY, in the body, right? So now somebody says, dude, you should be in New York. Then what happens?
And so I get up there and so this is where in my head, the story is supposed to be that like after school special ending. You had the little fat kid with a dream. He had a lot of issues, drops out of college 3 times, moves back in, loses 100 pounds, moves to New York City. And this is where the happy ending's supposed to start. And I found myself up there for a few years, and I was doing, they call it promotions work. So it's any little thing to try to make ends meet. So sometimes it would be doing coffee demonstrations at like a department store, and sometimes it was doing stuff at parties. Well, there was one morning they wanted me to go into Times Square at like 5:30 in the morning, and I was not a morning person back then of the day. And they basically, this lady gave me a bag. She's like, "Are you Jimmy?" She's like, "Cool. Here's." She gives me this bag. She goes, "Just go over on the other side of that van and change into this." So I'm like, okay, because you would show up to these gigs and not know what they were. And basically, if you ever saw the movie Newsies, she had me put on that outfit, like the little, like the knickers and the little paperboy hat and little like a paperboy bag. And I'm supposed to be passing out chocolates to the super friendly New Yorkers at 6 a.m. And this is where, I mean, you want to talk about just life punching you in the face. It'd have been one thing if they cussed at me and I got like the full New York treatment. It's when people didn't even acknowledge that I was there, right? It just was so demoralizing because I'd been there a few years. Again, in my head, things should have been happening by then. I felt behind in life. I felt like I finally did the right steps that I should be rewarded. And it was crazy. I found myself, so I'm in Times Square, and I find myself continuing I'm so demoralized and embarrassed. And I keep looking up at all the billboards in Times Square, right? And I see the Broadway show, or I see the new hit TV show, or the movies, or something. And in my head, I'm like, didn't they know this is how the story's supposed to end? The little fat kid from West Texas who gets his life together and does the right things, that's where it was supposed to end. And there was just some little voice in my head in that moment that said, Jimmy, stop waiting for other people to put you on their stages and start creating your own.
Well, let's go. Now you got me fired up. Oh my goodness. So, man, that gave me goosebumps. That's the part you
Me
if you
too.
could.
And I've told this story 1,000 times, and every time I get those chills all over again, like that same moment.
Dude, that is so good. I just appreciate being able to sit witness and hear this right now. And if you're hearing that, hear that part. And this is, I could never say it as eloquently as you said it, but this is how I would frame it. And I frame it to people is that so often we're herd animals. We are
Mm-hmm.
herd animals. And there's a reason why in ancient societies, one of the ways in which to really, really basically hurt a tribe member is to tell them, go you, and they had a ceremony. It was painful, and they would just let you watch you walk away, right? And it was that because it's gut wrenching. We don't want that. But to be a outlier, you have to first start as an outsider. And I tell people all the time is that if you want community, fucking draw a circle, stand in front of it, stand in the center of it rather, and invite people in. Invite people in, right? And that is that hero's journey moment that you're talking about when your higher self said, look, this part of you that was born that was always worthy, didn't need anything to be worthy, that didn't need any accolades, it doesn't matter your final score, and said, look, there's another there is something available to you, and you can work not for attraction but from attraction, right? And that's where most people are.
That's what I so love. And then since then, that was that 17 years ago when I found myself in business initially in the health and fitness space and in the in-home fitness space where I had my own transformation. But what I realized was all of this time that I had spent in performing and learning to be on a stage and learning how to get an emotional response, all these hidden hours in scene study classes and improv classes and all these places where I was like, man, I'm doing the work. I'm doing my 10,000 hours, my hidden reps that nobody saw. And instead of being frustrated because I thought that they should manifest themselves in what those billboards represented, all it was doing is that season of my life was preparing me to serve the audience that I've served for the past 17 years. And it was serving people in business that wanted to have a better impact. People, not that they wanted to be performers, but I had a skill set. And initially, you want to talk about worthiness and stuff. I was intimidated first to work with the financial advisors of the world and the lawyers of the world and the pro athletes and all the other industries I've worked with. Because in my head, I'm like, oh, they have real careers. They went to college. They finished. Why would they need what I have? And it was really the universe's way of saying, but Jimmy, you have a skill set that they need. And it was like, oh, I can come be a different piece of their puzzle to help them and their skill sets, which are different than mine, get that message out. And for me, that was the big aha was, oh, this wasn't all lost time. It wasn't lost reps. It wasn't lost hours. It was preparing me to serve people that I didn't realize were waiting for me and being prepared for me as well.
And the hallmark of your story, and you said it a little bit earlier about like in that moment you see how so much is available to you. It's what I say to people often. It's like everything you need is vibrating 1 inch from your skin.
Wow.
Success isn't a process of like, what can I learn? Success is a process of what can I unlearn and what can I let in that is really around me. And if I'm honest with myself too, I've never had a lack of opportunities in my life whatsoever. But what I did have a lack of was taking advantage of the opportunities that were around me or being unconscious of those as well. But don't you think, Jimmy, don't you think at the base of things like I think we're more alike than I even realize. Like I tell people like I am a creative, artistic person that accidentally became a scientist or a science person, not in the
Yeah.
reverse. I play guitar, I water paint, I'm writing a script, right? I'm talking to people about some acting stuff. But at my base core, I would say, you know what? Life is primarily sales, it is primarily communication or speaking, right? And it's really method acting. People think, oh, I'm acting, I'm not being real. No, guess what? You get to choose you in any situation. And really, we've seen this in the acting space. People like Leonardo DiCaprio would play Howard Hughes, and at the end of it, they had to put him through some of the techniques that I know on the neuroscience side because he started becoming obsessive compulsive. He started becoming paranoid. He started taking on those things. So you're talking about these key skill sets that if business owners could understand, that leaning into your ability to enroll and sell, leaning your ability to put on a good show or to become part of the theater, right? And to be able to communicate that in a way that's impactful. This is what all business owners are ultimately trying to do. But I think they try to parse it all up. Well, I need this for this thing and that for this thing when it should be a whole strategy. Am I speaking your language now?
Absolutely. Yeah, and they do. They try to compartmentalize things. And at the end of the day, we're all emotional creatures. I love the most when I work with clients that come from very analytical back. So you talked about science, or if I work with a financial advisor, and I always talk about being the non-analytical at all. Like I always feel like there's emotional decision makers and there's very technical analytical decision makers. But even the most analytical human beings on the face of the earth are still emotional decision makers that then justify what they've done analytically, right? And so I always say, at our very base, we have been storytellers since our inception, and we will still connect that way. And the magic is when those people trust me that come from the financial advisors, the scientists, the very, very technical people, that I still remind them, if you can learn to connect with your audience emotionally, by a story, by a narrative, number one, people are going to remember that better. They say 60
Mhm.
times more. There's also stats that talk about if you just lead with stats and figures and everything, most people will forget most of it 10 minutes later, right? But if you can tie, it's the reason why if I'm trying to remember somebody's name, if I can remember an anecdote or a story or something about them, it ties to that. And so I think you're absolutely right. What we try to do is compartmentalize. Oh, this is sales and this is marketing and here's finance. Oh, and here's the public speaking part of this thing. But it is this flow of everything. If you can learn for each of it to each one connect to the other, then it's this harmony, not trying to balance a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Man, it's so good. It's so good. It's a process of enrollment. That's why people playing the sales game, they should be playing the enrollment game. And for me, people are 4 times more likely to buy based on an emotional connection. People buy with emotion and justify with logic. There's even a great book by Neville Goddard, and he calls it, I think I'm going to get this wrong, but it's something on this order. He calls it like think feeling or think feelingly, right? And we know by science that you cannot have a thought without an emotion. You can't even see without an emotion. Like it's all filtered through that. So you being somebody who can be empathic, and I reverberate with that, can really help people. So this part of the story, now that you have this aha, right? And but it's still like the thing that I find is the most limiting is like I came from a dad who was abject poverty. I never thought about entrepreneurship.
Right.
When if you have a dad, if you have parents that like show you how to do a business and all these things, it's not that it's actually you're anymore in a state of depravity, but if you don't have the idea between your two ears, it becomes so hard to think about it and grow it into reality. So
Right.
like help us through like how the hell did you make this next leap? Because this is not part of your lineage.
No, I do have. I'm very thankful that both sides of my mom and my stepdad, my dad and my stepmom, when I was doing the acting thing, they were supportive. I don't know that they thought that I was gonna. I don't know what they thought. There was always, hey, have a plan B. They were trying to make me responsible, but it wasn't. I never had those parents who were like, don't be an actor or don't be a performer. I think they saw that was inherent in me. I don't know that they thought I was going to be famous or whatever from that side of things. And so when I first dipped a toe in entrepreneurship, like I said, it was really came from friends of mine because I was already it came on the fitness side. And I had some people saying, hey, you're really good at this. Or I'd go to an event and they would say, we'd like people to share testimonies. And so for me to grab a mic and get on stage came very natural to me when nobody else wanted to do. I didn't understand why everybody was scared to death. I was like, sure, I'll get up there because that was my playground. Like that wasn't work to me. And I think all of us downplay our gifts and they come easy to us, or we've done enough reps to where now it is second nature that we don't give ourselves credit because we're the ones that did it. We're like, oh, if we did it, anybody can do it. And we don't
Yes.
realize that our playground is somebody else's, like, nails on a chalkboard. I always tell people that people to me that are really good at numbers or love spreadsheets, we're different animals. Because if you send me a spreadsheet, I'm going to take a nap on my desk right here immediately. And to somebody else, they look at this and they go, this makes sense. This makes sense. And that, so what I realized is, oh, me getting on stage, sharing my story or interviewing, this was going back to the MC thing now, where the seeds were planted. I was really good at getting people comfortable enough to share their stories. What questions was I asking? How could I lead somebody in a conversation? None of these things did I ever think, oh, I'm going to make a living doing this someday. I just took these little opportunities one by one. These were kind of my early on, reps until somebody else was like, oh, can you come do this? And for me, the next step outside of that fitness world was my dad, who's been in real estate for 40 years, watching the people I was working with on, this was like early social media, right? 07, 08. And he said, Jimmy, can you come talk to my real estate agents? And I just thought they wanted to lose weight. And it took my dad kind of pointing out what I do. And he said, I was too close to it. I wasn't giving it enough credit. He said, I see people you work with, they don't talk about their product and service by name, but people all are attracted to them. And I had to step back and go, well, why? Oh, I know why this is. I didn't know my own process, I guess, at the time. I was just doing what came naturally. And so that was the first time I went and talked to a bunch of real estate agents, and I was like, can I do, again, you question yourself. Okay, I can do this in theater. I know I can do this with health and fitness in the network marketing world. Can I do it with these people? And so then the next step was there, and then financial advisors, then lawyers, and so it was these little tiny, it was just like my weight loss. I always tell people it took me 2.5 years to lose 100 pounds. It was all these baby steps to where this was the next step. Then that was the new normal. Then it wasn't trying to overdo everything overnight, and little step by little step, the next thing I knew, each one of those reps was, I was gaining confidence to where I know now, oh, I don't care what your industry is. If I can sit with you and I know who your audience is and what problem you solve, I absolutely can help you with your story. And that's where I think I started gaining that confidence and realizing, hey, there are other places that I can have an impact.
Wow, Jimmy, this has been such a good conversation. I'm definitely going to have you back because we need to hear more of this story. But the things that just popped up for me is like we're always the last to know about our greatness, right? We just don't
Absolutely.
under it, and just because it comes easy to us, we decide that it's really not a gift. And you're lucky to have family that based on that. As we wrap up things, like people definitely need to know about you and what you do. If people want to know more about this Frank Sinatra, public speaker and brand and story coach, like how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. What they can do is go to storywellcrafted.com. What I've done there is a quick video tutorial and a PDF that I literally walk you through what makes a great story and how you can build your business with it there. You can download it to your phone and always have it. So just go to storywellcrafted.com, download that, and then you can get in touch with me anyway through that link as well.
Yeah, and, you know, it is a testament to what you do. And guys, if you haven't looked him up, this guy is on stages with, and he's not a name dropper, but let's just, you know, give us a couple. Like you've been on stage with some pretty cool people. Give us a few here, Jimmy.
This year's been a cool year. I didn't realize that, little first grade Jimmy didn't know he would get on stage with Shaquille O'Neal and Hulk Hogan and David Goggins this past year, and Magic Johnson and David Meltzer, and the list kind of goes on and on. And it's one of those things that you are right. You talked about we're the last person to give ourselves credence for our gifts, and we undervalue them. Also, we just don't think. And so when somebody else comes along and goes, "I need you to help make my event great," or you come along somebody else that you put on a pedestal, whether it's because of their resume or if they're a celebrity, and you start realizing that their gift is just different than your gift. And I love the fact that you've talked about it so much, that we are all worthy, not because of the things we did, but we were already worthy. We were already gifted before the resume we want to put on top of that too. And so I've just continued to be blessed, and I just continue to go in with a servant's heart, and it's taken me to some really awesome stages.
Well, you know, you're the real deal, and that we can wrap up on this. And I just want to give you this compliment. Like you were on that stage, but the first time I met you, it was like when I met you, pulled me up there with you. There wasn't any elitism, like I belong up here and you belong down here, right? Which is, you know, that's easy to fall into when you're on a lot of the stages like that. And so I knew right away from an energetic perspective, like I need to know more about this dude, and you guys should know more about Jimmy as well. Thank you, brother, for being on the show. I really value you. Connect with Jimmy. Please, guys, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you know what to do to support us here. And I just want to remind all of us that the best part of being wealthy is being happy.
Thank you.